Sunday morning dawned unexpectedly cold for Billings, Montana. The July heat that had been tormenting the city all week suddenly receded, giving way to cool air flowing down from the nearby mountains. Detective Nisha Robinson got out of her patrol car, holding the hem of her leather jacket. Her slender figure in dark pants and a blouse froze as she glanced at the neat two-story house with a blue roof on Harmony Street. Patrol cars had already cordoned off the area with yellow tape, and neighbors, despite the early hour, had gathered behind the barrier, whispering and craning their necks in an attempt to see what was happening. Nisha smoothed her short, curly hair and walked purposefully toward the front door. "Detective Robinson," she introduced herself to the young patrolman guarding the entrance. "What do we have here?" "2 bodies, female," the officer replied, checking his notebook. "Found by the maid who comes once a week." The door was unlocked. She doesn't usually use a key. Upon entering, she found the homeowner and another woman showing no signs of life and immediately called 911. Nisha nodded and, pulling on latex gloves, went inside. The first thing that caught her eye was the perfect order. There were no signs of a struggle or overturned furniture. Only 2 bodies in the living room, one on the sofa, the other on the floor nearby. Both women were dressed in casual clothes. The one on the sofa was wearing an ivory silk robe, the other soft pants and a t-shirt. "Has Dr. Foster examined the bodies yet?" Nisha asked the forensic technician photographing the crime scene. "She just finished the preliminary examination." He nodded toward the kitchen. "She's in there writing up her report." Nisha walked into the kitchen, where Imani Foster was sitting at the table, a tall woman with a perfectly straight back, and her hair pulled back into a tight bun. Seeing the detective, she put down her tablet. "Nisha, good morning, although it's not a good morning. What can you tell us?" Nisha sat down in a chair opposite her. "The victims are 2 African-American women, both around 35 years old," Imani began, checking her notes. "The preliminary cause of death for both is gunshot wounds. The woman on the couch was shot in the chest, most likely through the heart, and died instantly. The second victim was shot in the head at close range. Time of death? Judging by rigor mortis and body temperature, between 12 and 16 hours ago. That means between 8 p.m. and midnight yesterday. Any ID? Yes, we found both of their bags. The woman on the couch is the homeowner, Ayanna Brooks, 35 years old, owner of the Rare Word bookstore in the city center. The other is Amara Jenkins, also 35, who teaches sociology at a local college." Nisha nodded, jotting down the information in her notebook. "Any signs of a break-in?" "None. The door was unlocked, but there's no damage to the lock." "So either they knew the killer and let him in, or he had a key," Nisha said thoughtfully. "Weapon?" "None found. Judging by the caliber of the wounds, it was a small caliber pistol, possibly a .38. The detective tapped her pen thoughtfully on her notebook. "Anything stolen?" "Not at first glance. The TV, laptop, jewelry, everything's here. The women's purses are in their bags with cash and credit cards." "It doesn't look like a robbery," Nisha concluded. "Imani, I need the full autopsy reports as soon as possible." "They'll be ready by tomorrow morning," the medical examiner nodded. Nisha returned to the living room and carefully examined the crime scene. She noticed 2 half-empty glasses of red wine on the coffee table. Next to them was an open bottle of expensive Merlot. On the walls were numerous framed photographs. Ayanna in her bookshop, Ayanna with her parents, Ayanna with friends, but there was no sign of Amara Jenkins in any of them. "Interesting," Nisha muttered, looking at the photos. They were close, but not a single photo of them together. She continued her inspection, paying attention to every detail. In the corner of the living room stood a small bookcase filled mainly with classic literature and contemporary novels. On the top shelf were several photo albums. While the forensic team was collecting evidence, Nisha went upstairs to the bedroom. The room was decorated in neutral colors, with a large double bed in the middle. The bed was neatly made, but the pillows were rumpled, as if someone had been sitting on the bed. On the bedside table was another glass of half-finished wine. Nisha opened the top drawer of the nightstand and found a small leather diary with the initials AB on the cover. She carefully flipped through the pages, most of which contained notes about everyday life, thoughts on books she had read, and business notes. but the last few entries caught her attention. We met again today. Every time I see AD, my heart starts beating faster. We have to be careful. Billings is a small town and rumors spread quickly. AD said she'll be ready to open up to the world soon. I'm not rushing her, but every day of waiting feels like an eternity. We almost had a fight today. There's something bothering AD, but she won't tell me what it is. I feel like she's hiding something. The last entry was dated yesterday. AD is coming over tonight. She said she has something important to tell me. I'm nervous, but I hope it's finally news that she's ready to make our relationship public. Nisha thoughtfully closed her diary and went downstairs. By this time, the bodies had been bagged and were being prepared for transport to the morgue. "Detective," a young officer called out to her. "The neighbors have gathered at the tape. Some say they knew the victims well." "Thanks. I'll take care of them." Stepping outside, Nisha noticed that the crowd of onlookers had grown. She approached the tape and introduced herself. "Detective Nisha Robinson, homicide. Did any of you know Miss Brooks well?" An elderly woman with short gray hair stepped forward. "I'm Dorothy Greenwood. I've lived across the street for 30 years. Ayana moved here about 5 years ago. She was a lovely girl, always said hello, sometimes brought me books from her shop. She lived quietly and rarely had visitors. Did you notice anything unusual last night? Visitors, strange noises?" "I saw a woman in a silver Toyota pull up at about 7 o'clock. They hugged at the door before going inside. I thought she was a friend." "Have you ever seen this woman before?" Dorothy thought for a moment. "Yes, several times in the last few months. She always came in the evening and sometimes stayed overnight. But Ayana never introduced her to her neighbors." "Did you ever see any men visiting her?" "Never, at least not in the last year." Nisha wrote down the statement and turned to the young man standing nearby. "Did you know Miss Brooks?" "Not very well," he replied. "I'm Ray Johnson. I live 2 houses down. I sometimes went into her bookshop. She was always friendly, but a bit aloof." "Did you see or hear anything last night?" "I got home around 9 and everything was quiet, but around 10 o'clock, I was letting my dog out and noticed a black sedan parked across the street from Ayana's house. Someone was sitting in it, but I couldn't make out who it was. The car drove away as I walked my dog further down the street." "Did you get the make or license plate number?" "I think it was a Ford, but I couldn't see the license plate. It was already dark." Nisha continued to question the neighbors, but no one provided any significant information. No one heard any gunshots, which could mean that a silencer was used or that the sound was muffled by air conditioners running on a hot summer evening. Back at the house, Nisha checked the victims' phones. Ayana's phone was unlocked, but Amara's required a password. Amara's number appeared repeatedly in Ayana's recent calls, but there were also calls to a bookstore, her parents, and a food delivery service. In Amara's bag, Nisha found a business card from the college where she taught and a photo with a man, apparently taken a couple of years ago. On the back was written, "Keyshawn and Amara, 5th anniversary. Officer Henderson," Nisha said to the young female police officer. "Find out everything you can about Amara Jenkins, her place of work, family, friends. I'm particularly interested in this man, Keyshawn, possibly her husband or ex-husband." "Will do, detective." Nisha walked around the house again, carefully examining each room. In Ayana's study on the first floor, she found folders with documents for the bookstore, tax returns, and personal papers. Everything was neatly arranged in folders, which spoke to the methodical nature of the owner. In the bathroom on the second floor, Nisha noticed 2 toothbrushes in a glass and 2 different shampoos in the shower. She opened the cabinet above the sink and found a standard set of medicines and cosmetics. Nothing unusual, except for a bottle of pills without a label. Returning to the bedroom, the detective carefully examined the bed and bedside tables. Under the pillow, she found a woman's scarf, and in the drawer of the second bedside table, a pair of earrings and a hair clip. "It looks like Amara was a frequent guest here," Nisha muttered under her breath. By noon, the main work at the crime scene was complete. The forensic team collected all possible evidence, photographed every corner of the house, and took samples for DNA analysis. Nisha stood in the middle of the living room, mentally reconstructing the events of the previous evening. Amara had arrived around 7, and she and Ayana had probably been discussing something important over a glass of wine. Then, a third person had appeared. The one who had arrived in the black sedan? Or someone else? There were no signs of a break-in, which meant that the killer either had a key or was let in. The absence of any signs of a struggle indicated that the victims knew their attacker or were taken by surprise. This wasn't a random robbery, Nisha concluded, turning to the officer standing next to her. This was a premeditated murder, and the key to solving it lies in the relationship between these two women. She glanced again at Ayana's diary, which was now packed in an evidence bag. The initials AD stood for Amara Jenkins. The entries clearly indicated a romantic relationship between the victims, but the last entry contained a hint of some kind of secret, something Amara was hiding and was planning to reveal on that fateful evening. "Officer Ramirez," Nisha said to her colleague, "I need you to contact the Rare Word bookstore and find out who is filling in for Miss Brooks while she's away. We need to talk to the staff to learn more about her life." "I'll do it, Detective." The sun was high in the sky when Nisha left her house on Harmony Street. Most of the neighbors had dispersed, leaving only a few of the most curious. Yellow police tape fluttered in the wind, marking the spot where just yesterday two women had been making plans for the future, unaware of what awaited them. "I'll find out what happened," Nisha promised quietly, looking at the house. "I'll find whoever did this." Monday morning began for Nisha Robinson with a cup of strong coffee and a stack of reports on her desk. The double murder on Harmony Street was already the main topic of local news, and the captain demanded quick results. The detective studied the photos of the victims closely. Ayana Brooks, refined, with an attentive gaze and a slight smile. Amara Jenkins, more serious, with deep, expressive eyes and a strict hairstyle. "Who were you really?" Nisha asked quietly, looking at the photos. "And who wanted you dead?" There was a knock at the door, and Officer Henderson entered the office with a folder of documents. "Good morning, Detective. I've gathered some information on Amara Jenkins, as you requested." "What did you find out?" Amara Jenkins, 35 years old, born in Chicago, moved to Billings 6 years ago. She taught sociology at Montana College. According to her colleagues, she was a brilliant teacher, but a very private person. She was married to Keishan Mills, a pharmacist at a local pharmacy chain. They divorced about a year ago. Reason for the divorce? Officially, irreconcilable differences. But I spoke with the secretary of the sociology department, Miss Patricia Coleman. She hinted that Amara changed significantly about a year and a half ago, became withdrawn, and often took time off work. Then she suddenly announced the divorce. Nisha tapped her pen thoughtfully on the table. "What about Ayana Brooks? 35 years old, born here in Billings. Her parents are local school teachers, both retired, now living in Florida. Ayana opened the Rare Word bookstore 4 years ago after working for a large publishing company in Seattle. She has never been married, and little is known about her romantic relationships. Were they acquainted before Amara moved to Billings? Not according to our records, but they shared a passion for literature. According to bookstore employees, Amara became a regular customer about 2 years ago. They often discussed books, then started meeting at a cafe." Nisha nodded and got up from the table. "We need to talk to the bookstore staff and Amara's colleagues. And we definitely need to meet her ex-husband. Do you have his contact information?" "Yes, he works at the nation's health pharmacy on Main Street. He's working today from 9 to 6. "Great," Nisha said, grabbing her jacket. "But first I want to stop by the morgue. Dr. Foster should be done with the autopsy." The morgue was cool and sterile as usual. Imani Foster was leaning over her computer, finishing her report when Nisha entered. "Good morning, Imani. Anything new?" The medical examiner nodded. "Yes, and it's quite interesting. First, the cause of death for both women has been confirmed as gunshot wounds. The bullets were all the same caliber, .38, most likely from the same weapon. Second, antiretroviral drugs were found in Amara Jenkins's blood." Nisha frowned. "So she had HIV?" "Yes, judging by the amount of drugs in her blood, she was undergoing regular treatment. The viral load was low, almost undetectable. That means she was following her doctor's orders." "What about Ayana?" "No HIV was detected, but there's something else. Traces of alcohol were found in both of their blood, equivalent to about 2 glasses of wine. And Amara also had traces of a tranquilizer, a small dose. Could she have taken a sedative because of stress? Possibly, Or someone could have slipped it into her wine. It's hard to say for sure. Nisha wrote this information down in her notebook. Thanks, Imani. Will the full report be ready today? Yes, I'll send it to you by the end of the day. Leaving the morgue, Nisha headed to the Rare Word bookstore. The small two-story Victorian building was located in the historic part of town. A stylish sign with an image of an open book hung above the entrance. Inside, it smelled of paper, coffee, and wood. Shelves lined with books rose to the ceiling. At the back of the store was a small reading room with comfortable armchairs and tables. Behind the counter stood a young woman with long dreadlocks braided into a high ponytail. When she saw Nisha, she tensed. "How can I help you?" "Detective Nisha Robinson?" Nisha introduced herself, showing her badge. "I'm investigating the death of Ayana Brooks. Are you?" "Janelle Corden, assistant manager. I've been working here for 3 years. I can't believe Ayana is gone." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. Can I ask you a few questions?" Janelle nodded and led Nisha into a small office at the back of the store. They sat down at a small round table. "Tell me about Ayana. What was she like?" Janelle took a deep breath. "Ayana was incredible. Smart, well-read, with amazing taste in literature. She built this store from nothing and turned it into a cultural center. We host literary evenings, children's readings, and author appearances." "What about her personal life?" "She was quite private. I know she was never married. She hardly ever talked about romantic relationships. Are you familiar with the name Amara Jenkins?" Janelle visibly tensed. "Yes, of course. She was a regular customer, a sociology professor at the college." "Were they close?" Janelle hesitated. "I think so. At first, they just discussed books. Then they started meeting at the cafe across the street. In the last few months, Amara often came in at the end of the day, and they would leave together. Do you think they were romantically involved?" "I don't want to speculate. But once I accidentally saw them holding hands in Ayana's office when they thought no one was looking. After that, I tried not to get involved in her personal life." "Did Ayana ever mention any problems? Maybe someone was threatening her or Amara?" "No, nothing like that, although she had been a bit tense over the last week. I asked her if everything was okay, but she said she was just tired." Nisha wrote down the information and thanked Janelle. Leaving the store, she noticed a cafe across the street. The Inkwell, a small, cozy place with a book-themed interior. Deciding that this might be the place where Ayana and Amara had met, she crossed the street. The cafe was not very crowded. The barista, a young man with a neat beard, smiled warmly. "What would you like?" Nisha showed him her badge. "Actually, I'd like to ask you a few questions." "Detective Robinson. I'm investigating a murder that happened over the weekend." The guy nodded, instantly becoming serious. "Yes, I read about it in the news. What a terrible tragedy. Ayana was a regular customer of ours." "And Amara Jenkins?" "Yes, they often came in together, usually in the evenings after the bookstore closed. They sat at that table in the corner." He pointed to a cozy table by the window, partially hidden by a decorative screen. "Did they look like a couple?" The barista shrugged. "It's hard to say for sure. They were close, that's for sure. Sometimes they held hands. But you know, these days people are more open, but many still prefer not to publicize their personal relationships." "Did you ever notice anything unusual? Arguments? Tense conversations?" "A couple of weeks ago, they were talking about something serious. Amara was crying and Ayana looked upset. But then they seemed to make up. I wasn't eavesdropping. I just noticed their mood when I brought their order." "Thanks for the information." Nisha left her business card. "If you remember anything else, give me a call." The next stop was Montaigne College. The campus was located on the outskirts of town, a few modern buildings surrounded by old maple trees. Nisha found the sociology department on the second floor of the main building. The secretary, Miss Patricia Coleman, a plump, middle-aged woman with kind eyes, greeted her with obvious concern. "Detective Robinson? Officer Henderson said you might stop by. What a terrible thing has happened. We're all in shock." "Tell me about Amara Jenkins." Patricia pointed to a chair near her desk. "Amara was one of our best teachers. The students adored her. She had a knack for explaining complex sociological concepts using simple examples. Her course on contemporary social issues was always the most popular. What was she like as a person? Quiet? Reserved? Always professional. But something changed over the last year and a half. She became more withdrawn and often took sick days. Did you know about her divorce? Yes. It was about a year ago. It came as a surprise to everyone. She and Keeson seemed like the perfect couple. He often stopped by after work and brought her flowers. And after the divorce? He came here a couple of times. I think he wanted to make up. Once I overheard them talking, he said something like, "We can get through this together." But Amara was adamant. Do you know anything about her relationship with Ayanna Brooks? Patricia hesitated. They were close friends. Amara often mentioned the bookstore and its owner. Ayanna would sometimes stop by after work, but Amara never spoke directly about the nature of their relationship. Did you notice any changes in her health lately? She lost weight and sometimes looked tired. Once I saw her taking some pills. She said they were vitamins, but we were all worried about her. Nisha thanked the secretary and asked permission to look around Amara's office. The small room was neat and functional. Bookshelves lined with textbooks and scientific journals, a desk with a computer, a few photographs on the walls, mostly landscapes of Montana. In a desk drawer, Nisha found a folder with medical documents. Looking through them, she frowned. Test results, prescriptions for antiretroviral drugs, records of visits to an infectious disease specialist. She had been diagnosed with HIV about a year and a half ago. That's why her behavior changed, Nisha muttered. And possibly the reason for the divorce. The next stop in the investigation was the nation's health pharmacy, where Amara's ex-husband worked. It was a spacious room with bright display cases and several customers at the cash registers. Nisha approached the pharmacy section, where a tall man in a white coat was arranging medicines on the shelves. "Keishan Mills?" she asked, showing her badge. "Detective Nisha Robinson. Can I talk to you in private?" The man tensed, but nodded. "Of course. Let's go to the break room." They walked into a small room with a sofa, a table, and a kitchenette. Keishan closed the door and turned to Nish. "This is about Amara, right? I heard the news. I can't believe she's gone." "I'm very sorry, Mr. Mills. When was the last time you saw your ex-wife?" Keishan sat down on the couch, his fingers clenched nervously. "About a week ago. We ran into each other at the supermarket. We exchanged a few words." "Were you in touch after the divorce?" "Not really. I tried to patch things up for the first few months, but she was adamant. She said it was better if we moved on." "Mr. Mills, I have to ask you, where were you on Saturday night between 8 p.m. and midnight?" Keishan visibly tensed up. "I worked until 9 p.m., then I went home. I watched basketball on TV and went to bed around 11 p.m. Can anyone confirm your alibi?" "I live alone, but my coworkers saw me when I left work." Nisha noticed his fingers twitch. "Mr. Mills, did you know about your ex-wife's diagnosis?" Keishan paled. Yes. She told me after she found out herself. It was a shock for both of us." "And that was the reason for the divorce?" "Not immediately. I wanted to support her, to go through this together, but she distanced herself, said she didn't want to be a burden." "And then?" He fell silent. "And then?" "Then I found out she was seeing someone, a woman, the owner of a bookstore. It was hard to accept." "Were you furious?" "I was upset, of course, but not angry. I just wanted her to be happy. If I had known it would end like this." Nisha noticed that his hands were still shaking and beads of sweat had formed on his forehead despite the coolness of the room. "Do you have a gun, Mr. Mills?" "Number, I've never liked guns." "Are you sure?" "Many people in our state own firearms. I don't have one," he replied firmly, but his gaze darted away for a moment. Nisha made a note in her notebook. "Thank you for talking to me, Mr. Mills. If you remember anything else that might help the investigation, please contact me." Leaving the pharmacy, Nisha got into her car and stared thoughtfully at the front door. Keishan was definitely hiding something. His nervousness, his trembling hands, his evasive answers, everything pointed to the fact that he wasn't being completely honest. Back at the station, Nisha found an envelope from the tech department on her desk. Inside was a printed report of the contents of Ayanna Brooks' phone. Among other things, there was correspondence with Amara from the past few months. Nisha began reading the messages, starting with the earliest ones. "Can't wait to see you tonight. You're changing my life for the better. A. You've become my light in dark times. Thank you for being there. AD." The correspondence became more intimate over time, confirming the romantic nature of their relationship. But about 3 weeks ago, the tone of the messages changed. "We need to talk seriously. There's something I need to tell you. AD. You're scaring me. Did something happen? A. Not over the phone. Let's meet at a cafe on Wednesday. AD. After that meeting, I don't know what to say. I need time to think about all this. A. I understand. I'm sorry. I should have told you earlier. AD. And then, a few days later, I've thought everything through. It doesn't change my feelings for you. We'll get through this together. A. You have no idea how much this means to me. I was so afraid of losing you. Anno Domini. And finally, the correspondence the day before the murder. I'll be there tomorrow at 7. We need to discuss how to move forward. Anno Domini. I'll be waiting. I love you no matter what happens. A. I love you too, and I'm so sorry I hid my HIV status from you for so long. I was afraid you would turn away from me. Anno Domini. Never. We'll get through this together. A. Nisha leaned back in her chair, thinking about what she had read. The picture gradually became clearer. Amara had learned about her diagnosis a year and a half ago, which led to changes in her behavior and, ultimately, to her divorce from Keishan. She then began a relationship with Ayanna, but hid her HIV status. When the truth came out, they decided to stay together. But someone else knew about their relationship and Amara's diagnosis. Someone with a motive for murder. Nishi's gaze returned to the name Keishan Mills in her notes. Her ex-husband, who may have still loved his wife and was shocked not only by her diagnosis, but also by her new relationship. A man who had clearly been nervous during their conversation. A man who had no solid alibi for the night of the murder. "We need to check him out more thoroughly," Nish murmured, picking up the phone. "Officer Henderson, I need a search warrant for Keishan Mills' house, and check if any firearms are registered in his name." Tuesday began with an unexpected discovery for Nisha Robinson. Forensic investigators revisiting the crime scene found a brass bullet casing under the sofa in Ayanna Brooks's living room. It appeared to have rolled there during the shooting and had been overlooked during the initial examination. .38 caliber, confirmed Marcus Evans, head of the crime lab, handing Nisha a transparent bag containing the evidence. "And there's a partial fingerprint on it." "Already checked?" "Yes, we ran it through the database. It matches Keishan Mills. He was vetted when he was hired by the pharmacy chain, so his prints are in the system." Nisha examined the shell casing closely. "That changes things. Now we have physical evidence linking him to the crime scene." The next piece of news came from Officer Henderson, who had been checking Keishan's alibi. "He was seen leaving work at 9 p.m. on Saturday," Henderson reported. "But a neighbor claims she didn't see his car in the driveway until midnight. And one more thing, he does have a registered .38 caliber handgun. He bought it 3 years ago for self-defense." "Good work," Nisha nodded. "What about the search warrant?" "It'll be ready in an hour. Judge Patterson has already signed it." Nisha reached for her jacket. "Get the team ready. As soon as we get the warrant, we're going to his house." While waiting for the warrant, Nisha reviewed the case files once more, piecing together a possible sequence of events. Amar learned he was HIV positive a year and a half ago. This led to her divorce from Keishan, although, according to testimony, he wanted to save the marriage. Amara then began a romantic relationship with Ayanna Brooks, but hid her diagnosis from her. When the truth came out, Ayanna decided to continue the relationship. But what if Keishan found out? What if he was afraid he might have been infected before the divorce? "Motive," Nisha whispered. "Fear, jealousy, and anger." When the warrant was obtained, Nisha and 4 officers went to Keishan Mills' house in a quiet suburb of Billings. The single-story cottage with a neat lawn looked peaceful in the afternoon sun. The patrol car stopped a short distance away so as not to attract attention. "He should be home," Henderson said. "It's his day off." Nisha stepped up to the porch and knocked firmly. A few seconds later, the door opened. Keishan, dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looked at the police officers in surprise. "Detective Robinson, what's going on?" "Mr. Mills, we have a search warrant for your home," Nisha said, handing him the document. "Please step aside." Keishan paled but complied. The officers entered the house and began a methodical search, starting with the living room. Nisha noticed how clean and tidy it was. No clutter, minimal furniture, everything in its place. "Mr. Mills, we'd like to see your registered firearm," she said. "Why?" he asked nervously. "I don't understand what's going on." "It's standard procedure. We check all registered firearms as part of the investigation." Keishan hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. It's in the bedroom, in the top drawer of the dresser." Officer Henderson went in the direction indicated and returned shortly with a puzzled expression. "It's empty, Detective." Keishan's face contorted with fear. "That's impossible. It's always there." "When was the last time you saw the gun?" Nish asked, watching his reaction closely. I don't remember exactly. Maybe a week ago. I don't check it very often." "Mr. Mills, where were you on Saturday night? And this time, I want to hear the truth." Keishan sank down onto the sofa, his shoulders slumped. "I already told you. I worked until 9, then went home. Your neighbor claims she didn't see your car until midnight. She's mistaken. I was home." At that moment, one of the officers called from the basement. "Detective Robinson, you need to see this." Nisha went down to the basement, leaving Henderson to watch Keishan. In the far corner of the basement, the officer pointed to a plastic container partially hidden behind some old boxes. "I checked the contents," he said. "There are clothes with what looks like blood on them and a pair of latex gloves." Nisha put on her gloves and carefully lifted the lid of the container. Inside were a dark shirt and jeans with faint brown stains, as well as a pair of latex gloves. "Pack everything up for the lab," she ordered, "and keep looking for a weapon." Going upstairs, Nisha saw that Keishan was still sitting in the same position, staring at the floor. "Mr. Mills, we found clothes with bloodstains in your basement. Can you explain this?" He looked up, his eyes filled with despair. "I want to talk to a lawyer." "That's your right. But right now, we're arresting you on suspicion of the murders of Ayanna Brooks and Amara Jenkins." While Henderson read Keishan his rights, the search of the house continued. In the garage, under a pile of old rags, a .38 caliber handgun was found. "Looks like he tried to get rid of the evidence but didn't finish the job," one of the officers remarked. "Or didn't have time," Nisha nodded. "Pack the gun for ballistics." At the station, Keishan was placed in an interrogation room. Nisha gave him time to talk to his lawyer, a gaunt, middle-aged man named Gerald Thompson. An hour later, they were ready to talk. "Mr. Mills," Nisha began, sitting down across from him, "we have your fingerprint on the shell casing found at the crime scene. Clothes with bloodstains and a gun that is likely the murder weapon were found in your home. Your alibi has not been confirmed. I think it's time to tell the truth." The lawyer put his hand on Keishan's shoulder. "My client understands the seriousness of the situation, Detective, but before he makes any statement, we would like to know what charges he is facing. At this point, it's double first-degree murder, but if your client cooperates, we can discuss the possibility of reducing the charges to second-degree murder." The lawyer leaned toward Keishan and whispered something in his ear. Keishan nodded slowly and straightened up. "I didn't plan to kill them," he said quietly. "Things got out of control." Nisha turned on the tape recorder. "Tell us what happened on Saturday night." Keishan took a deep breath. "I saw them together by accident a week ago. Amara and this woman, Ayanna. They were kissing in a car outside a bookstore. It was like a punch in the gut. I still loved Amara, even though we were divorced. It hurt to see her happy with someone else." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "On Friday, I got tested for HIV. You see, when Amara told me about her diagnosis a year and a half ago, I was in shock. We had stopped being intimate long before that, and she assured me that I couldn't have been infected, but I still had my doubts. I got tested every few months, and all the tests were negative. But this last one, was it positive?" Nisha asked quietly. Keishan nodded, his eyes filling with tears. I was sure I got it from her. That means she lied to me. And now she's seeing this woman, putting her at risk too. I was angry, confused, scared. On Saturday, I had a drink after work, then decided to go to Ayana's to warn her about the danger. I knew where she lived because I had followed Amara once and saw her go into that house. What happened when you got there? It was around 10 o'clock at night. I knocked, and Ayana opened the door. She looked surprised, but invited me in when I said I was Amara's ex-husband and needed to talk to her about something important. Amara was there, in the living room. She turned pale when she saw me. Keishan paused, gathering his strength. I started yelling, accusing her of lying, of infecting me, and now putting another woman in danger. Amara tried to explain that she had a low viral load, that she was taking medication, that Ayana knew about her status, but I was too angry to listen. I pulled out my gun. "Why did you bring a gun?" Nisha interrupted. "I wasn't going to use it, I don't know. Maybe I wanted to scare them, it was all a blur." "Go on." Ayana stood between me and Amara and told me to leave. She said they loved each other, that they could work things out together. I lost control. I shot her. She fell onto the sofa. Amara screamed and rushed towards me. We struggled and then there was a second shot. I don't even remember pulling the trigger. The room fell silent. Nisha looked at the broken man in front of her, whose life had been shattered in an instant. "What did you do then?" I stood there, unable to believe what had happened. Then I panicked. I put on the gloves that were in my car and tried to wipe the fingerprints off the door handles and light switches. I didn't know what to do with the gun, so I took it with me. At home, I hid the gun and my stained clothes in the garage, planning to get rid of them later. But the next day, the news about the murder was everywhere, and I just couldn't bring myself to leave the house. Nisha turned off the recorder. "Mr. Mills, you said your last HIV test was positive. Are you absolutely sure about that?" Keishan nodded. "I got the results on Friday, from a private clinic in Billings. We'll verify that information," Nisha said, standing up. "The officers will take you to your cell now. Tomorrow you'll be taken to court to be formally charged." When Keishan was taken away, Nisha went to her office and contacted the clinic he had mentioned. After several calls, she was able to confirm that Keishan Mills had indeed been tested for HIV last Wednesday and received a positive result on Friday. 2 days later, with all the evidence gathered and analyzed, Nisha sat in Captain Rodriguez's office, finishing her report on the case. Ballistics confirmed that the bullets taken from the victims' bodies were fired from Mills' gun, she said. The clothes found in his home had blood from both victims on them. His confession matches the evidence and witness statements. The case is closed. The captain nodded. "Good work, detective. The prosecutor is confident he'll get a conviction. Mills is facing life in prison without parole." Nisha put the case file aside. "You know, Captain, there are no real winners in this story. 3 lives have been destroyed, and each of the participants has become a victim of circumstances in their own way." "What do you mean?" Amara learned of her diagnosis and tried to protect her husband by breaking off their relationship. But she hid the truth from her new partner, putting her at risk. Ayana loved Amara so much that she was willing to accept her diagnosis and build a future together. And Keishan? He got a false positive test result. "What?" the captain asked in surprise. "I contacted the clinic. They retested his sample and found an error. The second test was negative. They were going to tell him on Monday. If he had waited just 2 days." Captain Rodriguez shook his head. "Damn irony of fate." "Exactly," Nisha replied quietly. "Fear, jealousy, mistrust, all of it led to a tragedy that could have been avoided." Leaving the police station that evening, Nisha paused on the steps and looked up at the starry sky. Sometimes in her work, there was no clear line between right and wrong, between victims and criminals. Sometimes there were only people entangled in a web of their own emotions and fears, making the wrong decisions with terrible consequences. At times like these, Nisha reminded herself why she had chosen this profession, not just to catch criminals, but to find the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. Only the truth could bring some comfort to those left to live with the aftermath of tragedy. With that thought in mind, she headed for her car. Tomorrow would be a new day and a new case. For now, The story of Ayana, Amara, and Keyshawn was yet another reminder of the fragility of human life and how quickly everything could change with one wrong step.